Welcome to Leading with Curiosity. Command and control leadership is dead. We interview leaders, entrepreneurs, and executive coaches challenging old paradigms and fostering cutting-edge leadership. Here's your host, certified executive coach, Nate Leslie.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to Leading with Curiosity. In today's episode, we're going to take a little side road and try something a little bit different. I am actually on a panel in this episode hosted by the SupportingLines Institute founder, Jeff Smith. You might remember Jeff from episode 4, where we explored the secret to high-performance culture. The SupportingLines Institute runs a human experience summit 2 times a year, and this is an audio recording of part of that session. We will sprinkle in these recordings throughout the next few episodes, and so today is part 1 of 3. On the panel with me is Janet Wood. Janet was a high-level leader in companies like SAP, global software company, where she talks about, when they were trying something with a leader, where with their leadership group, they'd roll it out with 1,000 leaders, and if it was successful, they'd roll it out with another 8,000. The scale at which she talks about the leadership initiatives that she was responsible for just blows my mind. In kind of semi-retirement, she was the CEO of Science World in Vancouver, which for so many of us would be, the epitome of a senior leadership role. And for her, it was in semi-retirement that she did that. And Jeff Smith, the founder of the SupportingLines Institute, where I am a certified practitioner, and they're a good partner of mine. Jeff used to lead a sales team at a global helicopter company. He helped take sales from $800 million to $1.6 billion. He tells stories of, decisions and protocols and systems that they had to have in place that might lead to a $25 million mistake where they needed to put a helicopter on the inside an airplane to get it somewhere in the world delivered on time if their systems weren't in place in the right way. So the leadership challenges Jeff leans into are massive, and all of those experiences led him to create the high performance index that we use with many of our leaders and organizations that I work with. But our data shows that many leaders think that we're supporting our teams in a way where people are able to grow both personally and professionally. Yet something is lost in our delivery where our teams don't experience that.
Janet's examples of that very low cost work and your comment that so much of this is common sense for leaders in organizations who maybe haven't had a lot of external development work or really haven't really dove into it. Janet's example of 8,000 leaders in one organization, that's more, when you talk about academically validated research, that one survey to show that in 8,000 leaders, there's ones at the negative 100 and ones at the positive 100. Like, this is a thing.
It's pretty compelling.
And there's stuff you can do about it. It just becomes a bit silly how common sense it is, and how human nature causes us to ignore it, often in the face of our own challenges in our own lives, or an insecurity that, it's going to be clunky and it's going to feel weird, that, personal, like, this isn't 1960, personal life doesn't need to be left at home. It can't. We bring our whole selves to work. So that's just kind of what came up for me when she described that the other day as well.
It's cool too, because even in that 8,000 person organization, these are really about individual interactions, right? They're about how you relate to the people on your team, how you relate to your leader. Is that person showing genuine interest? And there are things when we talk about, the work that we do, and you uncover things like we need to involve more people in planning. There you can start to get into something more programmatic, where maybe you don't have the influence or sponsorship to just do it. You don't have that problem in this one. Right? You can go do a performance conversation. You can go do a one-on-one. You can do all these things. And even if you have some corporate programs you have to follow, it's amazing to me the number of organizations that have performance conversation processes that are robust and expensive and well documented. There's training going everywhere. And then they still get crappy scores in our survey on, I have regular ongoing performance conversations. Because they're having them. They're not good. They're not about development, right? They're about I actually had one person say, and I've heard this multiple times, but one person said it best. It's like, I think the problem with our performance conversation process might be that when we sit down to have it, my leader says, okay, this is stupid, but let's just get it over with. We have to do this.
That's a great start.
That's what genuine interest doesn't look like.
Yeah.
Good
right?
sales, the good sales move,
Yeah.
right, Janet?
Oh, yeah.
Janet, you had this example too of where I had another person get a poor performance review by email, no convo, and the leader said, you need to really start making some rapid improvements. Boom, rocket across the board. Like this is what's happening, right?
Well, this is why at SAP we actually went to no performance ratings and switched into what was called continuous feedback culture.
Right.
So the idea was, and of course we piloted it with 1,000 managers before we rolled it out to the remaining 8,000. But it was because it was everybody would focus in that one time a year when you were told how you were doing. You would just focus on the word. Was it outstanding or was it needs improvement? And you didn't hear anything else, assuming the manager did do a good job of providing feedback. You didn't even really hear it because your bonus was also tied to that word.
Oh, no.
And so we went to this continuous feedback, which is about, just giving people feedback in the moment or shortly thereafter, both positive and development feedback. And because it went really well so far, at least when I left, it was going really well because people really everyone wants to be good at their job. Everyone wants to make an impact, and getting feedback in a timely manner makes a big difference.
Yeah, it's
and that thing, that piece of feedback in it that's 11 months old. Well, that would have been useful 11 months ago because I probably could have done something about it. I was talking to a leader at an accounting firm, major, global accounting firm, who said in their performance reviews, it had to be bell curve. So they could only rate so many at a certain level. So it's like, here's the definition of insanity. Let's say that we hire the most capable accountants in the world. And then let's give a bunch of them a rating of C- because we have to. Right. That's crazy.
So you're awesome, and now you're average. No, I think this is definitely is a a thing that is worthy of an entire summit is performance management. And I think we're okay with having some sort of performance conversation process, but the minute you tie it to money and to promotions directly, you've killed it, because now it becomes a negotiation to get the word as opposed to hearing the feedback. And so that is, that's catastrophic when people do that. So I'm glad that, Janet, you've moved away from that. That's awesome. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to hear from some of our esteemed guests.
Hi, it's Amanda Smith. I work for the Provincial Health Services Authority. And thank you, Janet and Nate, for this discussion this morning. It has been really, really fantastic. So my story, it's a little bit explained in my comments in the thought exchange. I had a leader who was really great at setting development goals, and working on her team's tool belt, as she called it. And so it was putting different things into our toolkit. And when we would do that, she would then allow us to practice it. Most often it was in team meetings. So for example, I had gone out and done a facilitation course, and then when I came back from that, she allowed me to facilitate team meetings. So it was like a safe place to practice and get feedback from my own team members, so that when I had to go out then in front of, to facilitate a 50-person executive meeting or whatever, I had practiced what I had learned. So I wasn't going in cold, and I was going in with confidence. Another example was I had taken a negotiation course. And so the next time, there was an opportunity to practice some of those skills, my leader at the time came with me to the meeting. So she let me lead it to practice, but she was there, if I got stuck or into hot water. So it was just a really fantastic way to feel supported. And I knew that she cared, and I knew that she wanted me to be better. And that's how she showed it.
So great. And I think, Nate, I'm just plugging the hell out of the podcast here, but I think that's something, it's amazing. Like, leaders don't practice, right? We don't get to practice. So imagine, Amanda, Nate, in this sports analogy, imagine if professional athletes never practiced. And Nate and I talked about, like individual contributorship and people management they're actually totally different things, like different sports. So imagine changing sports and not getting to practice. It's just all games. That's actually the leadership experience, I think, for many.
Yeah.
So this is great. That's a great example.
Yeah. And this word practice has come up a number of times today. And the Roy Group in Victoria love to say there are no experts, just people in practice. And in Janet's high stakes world of managing, being responsible for thousands of people, we feel like it's game day all the time. And if we feel like it's game day all the time, we play it safe. The hockey analogy is we just chip the puck in, for the fear of risking turning it over, and just get rid of it. So it's not my mistake. Whereas in practice, you try that move against the defenseman, you try new stuff, you work at it, you get tons of repetitions. And as leaders, we have to find ways, maybe moments in the day, as Amanda just described, to give ourselves permission and our team permission to try it.
Yeah. And it's like, if people have an example I like too, is like, if you've got to have a really challenging conversation with someone, prepare for it and role play it with someone else, and then do it. Like, practice for the game. So that, especially because, like, Janet, you were talking about how a lot of these interactions come down to like these 2-minute, things, these 2-minute interactions. If one of those is coming, you can probably see it. Often you can see it. Practice.
It's another great example too of a no charge development opportunity for somebody.
Totally.
Right. And
just
then
had to think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, I love this next one. This is something that, Janet used to do this. I felt like we would sit in a lot of different meetings, and I worked at another organization where the CEO would give me a hard time because I did this. He'd be like, "Why is your team here? Don't you know what the answers are?" And it's like, "Oh man, you don't really know what leadership is." Okay, so invites me to senior staff meeting. Who owns that one? And
while you're watching for that, I will tell you a story that early in my career at SAP, just like you, Jeff, I did get criticized for bringing someone into a meeting to answer detailed questions. And it was, to me, it doesn't make sense. And as leaders, you shouldn't feel like you need to know every detail of everything you're doing, and that you can bring someone in. It's good for their development. It takes a lot of stress. Leaders can spend a lot of time prepping for meetings, which is actually a real waste of time. It's much better to bring the right person into the meeting who can answer the question versus you gathering the team together and trying to download it all before you go into a forecast review or another kind of meeting. I know you don't always have control over it, but if you do, just give that some thought.
No, that's great. And I think, so maybe whoever's got I'll make one comment on this. Whoever's got the next one that the leader brought up and acknowledged things months later, whoever that one is, please raise your hand and we'll get you promoted here to a panelist. The other thing here, the person nailed it in their comment, is that it's their work, right? And so there's two things happening here. One is the recognition that this so-called worker bee, this person in the organization, has just put a ton of work into this. And so you're not there taking credit, you're giving them a little bit of showcase. But the other thing we're doing, again, 30 things out of the 36 things we need leaders to do on this checklist of leadership, everyone needs to know how to do them. So this is also helping this person demystify the, what's going on inside that boardroom, right? What's going on inside this management meeting. You realize that it's actually just people talking about different stuff in a meeting that probably looks a lot like yours. All right, who owns the next one? The leader brought up and acknowledged months later something I previously mentioned. We would like you to share your story. So please raise your hand.
And while you're waiting for them to raise your hand, I'd say that's an important thing about leadership trust, is giving people credit and your team seeing that you're giving them credit. And we all know that as a leader, in a healthy environment, you don't have to be responsible for everything to progress your career. Your manager and the executives or the leadership of the company should be looking at how you're doing overall, how your team is doing. And great leaders will move forward because your team has done a great job. You don't have to do everything.
100%. I mean, in our research, we see that, teamwork, even accountability, and the meaning of work, like finding purpose in your work, those are all the things that actually drive execution. And those are peer activities, not leader activities. So by definition, those are things the leader, like if you know people's how better than they do, there's a big problem there. It means they either don't know their job or you're micromanaging. Like leaders should focus on this is where we're trying to go. This is the direction. People should have a better understanding of what the how is. If not, there's a whole bunch of other deeper problems we probably need to talk about. Okay, how about the next one? We'll come back to this one because if we don't get the person to share it, we'll talk about it. So we have board members that are international business leaders that never hesitate to acknowledge the contributions to staff. That's awesome. And would it be even awesomer if someone would come through, and it looks like we got Brian. And yes, awesomer is a real word. Go look it up. At least it's probably on our blog somewhere. Brian. This time it's Brian for sure. Last time I thought it was Brian and it was Amanda. So Brian, come on in and share your story.
All right, so we have, our board of directors comes in when we have in-person board meetings back in the times before COVID. They would come in from all the way across Canada, and they would always we would bring in and as Janet mentioned, we'd do that too. We'd bring in our staff to report on and to answer questions to the board in those areas where they're the ones leading the project, right? Because they're the expert on it. So I'm the VP of Finance. I don't need to answer the questions on the detailed financial information. I'll bring my staff in to do that because they don't need to tell me and have me report to the board. Then the other thing that we would do that's not in that comment, but to foster that engagement between the board and all our staff members, we have one board meeting a year, and these are day-long board meetings where we have a luncheon where we bring all our staff into that meeting, whether or not they're involved in the meeting or not, and they get to sit down with the board members and engage with them, and that allows them as staff members to kind of if you're not interacting with your board members, there's always that kind of distance and that giant sense of awe, and they don't want to screw everything up because you have these board members that are looking over your shoulder, and it builds that kind of human connection between the staff members and the board that allows them to interact, I think, a little bit better.
I think that's awesome, and I think you raise a really interesting point there. One of the coolest things I ever experienced at Mobify when I was the CFO and then the COO is I think people had this view of the board as like this thing that was out there. It's like the board wasn't evil, but they didn't really know what it was, and it had a lot of like power or something. It was like this orb, satellite, kind of orbiting the company. And the people on this board are people like, Hannes Blum, Eric Patel. I mean, these are good humans, just really good people. And so what we did was, Andrew Lugsden, just really, really good humans, really know their stuff and like meeting people. So what we did was we brought in lunch. So we had the board meeting, and the boardroom looked onto the kitchen, and it was like all glass walls. So they would see this mysterious board meeting all day. And then what we did is everyone came out and we had like the board mingled with staff and had lunch together for like an hour. And then we did an Ask Me Anything with board members, and the staff got to ask some questions. And it just completely changed the dynamic. They realized that actually the board was a huge part of helping us in our growth, in our development, in our strategy. We got through a couple of tough times. The board was super helpful with that. So it's just demystifying some of these things has so many benefits, like you're saying, Brian. There's recognition in there. There's also connection. It's like the board is a super important group of people. So I love this one. I mean, it's Janet, Nate, I'd love to get your perspective on this one as well. But this is it's a really great one to bring up, Brian. I wouldn't have thought about it quite that way. So thanks for that.
Yeah, what's coming to mind for me in Brian's stories and Janet's is the idea that a leader should know everything. We've been putting that on ourselves for a long time, but for someone to expect that of us is actually kind of a strange notion. And it reminds me of our definition of leadership effectiveness, Jeff, which we borrow from the leadership circle, is the ability to enhance the capabilities of everyone around us. So if we've got these people doing this great work, keeping each other accountable, building this culture, and then we take all their information and report it on their behalf to some other people who have been disconnected to the work, that doesn't seem like a very good human experience. And when Bill Gates admits he could no longer be a programmer for Microsoft, I mean, what leader at scale could possibly know all the answers? And what would your life be like if you did? I mean, my gosh.
It's another unintentional diminishing behavior, actually, yes. Really, right?
Right.
Yes.
And on the board, I just think, Brian, that's such a great example, just giving, first, because I sit on several boards, it's really, I really appreciate the opportunity to see someone beyond the leadership team who, are in every board meeting. It's great to have that chance to hear from employees who are really on the ground about what's happening. So most of the boards I'm on engineer ways to interact with the staff or have them come in to do presentations. It's just a really good practice. So I'm glad that your company does that. I love the one about the mental health challenges right now. Yep. I hope someone on the call feels open to chatting about that, because
someone has the psychological safety to share it.
Yeah, it really is. It right now in COVID. Oh, it's Emily.
It's Emily again. Odds are it's going to be Emily.
It's all right. There's still all kinds of stigma around mental health issues. And so if your manager can talk to you about it, like, oh my gosh, just imagine the pressure that takes off to let the employee talk about it.
Hey, Jasmine Allen from Mission Possible.
We can call you Emily.
Sure. I love that name. Like. It's a beautiful name. So yeah, I mean, we at Mission Possible, we're a nonprofit organization that works with people that face a significant barriers in their life. And so, we really try to practice what we preach here. But even still, in leadership, oftentimes there's still boundaries and barriers, and people are often reluctant to share. And so I was so impressed when I realized that this was a safe space to just be open about those challenges and not to feel shame, and not to feel like I had in previous environments where you need to keep your personal life and your professional life separate. And you need to face those challenges that you have outside of work. And so having a leader that doesn't just say, oh, you're welcome to share, but is open to share himself, and also share, any of the struggles that are going on in his life, not in an overly open kind of way, but in a way that's appropriate. It makes us all feel comfortable to do that. And so as a leader myself, I certainly hold that example for my team as well. And so throughout COVID, it's just been so challenging for everyone. And so I've created within my own team an environment where we do segues before all of our weekly meetings. Instead of doing personal high, professional high, we've been doing mental health check-ins instead. And in that situation, we take turns kind of with a topic. So sometimes it's like, what are you struggling with this week that you just want to get off your chest? Sometimes it's, what's a song that makes you feel really good, and helps you get out of the funk? So things like that. And it just creates a situation of emotional safety that is so incredibly valuable, and has helped me so much personally, and has helped me as a leader too, because I have a leader that is showing that by example. I feel like it's okay to spend this time connecting with my team on this personal level and making sure they feel that they're okay, that they feel seen as a whole person. And it's really made a difference. And I mean, it's not about productivity, but it is too. But it's made a huge difference. We've managed to be, my team has managed to be incredibly successful despite the pandemic. And that's been I think largely because we are able to have this openness amongst our team.
That's amazing. Janet,
Well,
I know you have lots to say on this.
Oh, well, I'm just so glad that we got to talk about this, because I just think it's, as we talked about earlier, things have just gotten way more complex for leaders. And one of the core competencies of good leaders is being vulnerable. I think, Jasmine, one of the things you're talking about is showing that vulnerability, and that it can really, as you said, just create a safe place for other people to be vulnerable. And you know, we all need to realize that just because an employee isn't, or a team member isn't talking to you about something, doesn't mean there's not something going on, and it's not impacting their life and how they show up at work and how they show up with their colleagues. And so I just love that example. I'm so glad that's the environment that you're working in. And I hope everyone that's on the call strives to have a similar experience if you don't already. Like, just try and open up to your team, be a little bit of vulnerable. You don't have to share all kinds of details, but just let them know that it's a safe place to talk about those kinds of things.
I have learned recently about myself that I just love to kind of oscillate back and forth between real world examples like Jasmine just shared, and connecting it to that's a thing, sort of the theoretical leadership, right? And she used the word seen. And you know, in coaching, the foundation of our practice, Jeff, is there's a inherent human need to feel seen, heard, and understood. And that's what coaching can do, but that's also what a leader can do. And she made a comment that I had alluded to earlier about, you know, in the 60s, maybe you didn't bring, or maybe 10 years ago, you didn't bring your whole self to work. You tried to park it at home. It sparks our conversation in the prep call about Tim Galway's work in that your performance equals your potential minus your interference. So your performance will only be as good as you've been able to address the interference. Mental health in this conversation being an obvious interference in your ability to perform and reach your highest potential. So it has to be connected.
Absolutely. I think just the fact that you, like you say here, Jasmine, in the comment, and also as you talked about, like, sometimes it's just helpful to know that you're not alone. you're not the only one that's having the challenge. And it is a weird thing. Like I've said many times, like I've used counseling before. I've had a couple of times where I really, really needed it, and it was quite helpful. And it's like, I've had other times where I like tore a muscle. So, all right, call my physio guy, who at one point when I was still playing hockey was on speed dial. And so other things we would go do, but that one somehow we're not there yet. But I think we will get there, partly because we have to, and partly because it'll continue to be, if we have conversations like Jasmine's talking about, it'll keep getting demystified. So we're at time. I love this part where we get everyone's participation. So before you drop in the call, two quick things. The first thing is Tiana's going to put a link in here to our blog. So we are fairly active. Usually we try to put up something every week, certainly every other week. We're also going to be relaunching the e-learning system in our SupportingLines cloud. And one of the things that pertains to how leaders practice, we're actually going to put up some stuff here over the next month around helping people do video analysis. Given that you're doing one-on-ones, one of the best things you can do to learn is record a one-on-one and then watch it again with our checklist. So by the end of the month, that stuff will be live. So with that, thanks so much. The next summit is actually going to be, the topic is going to be everybody's a leader. And we're going to flip this. What we're going to do is get some executives facilitating a panel of staff members, the so-called worker bees, as we saw in our thought exchange. So we're going to flip it around, because I think while we can sit here and pontificate about what great leadership is, ultimately the people we're leading are the ones that really get to judge that. Because it's really for them. And so the next summit is going to flip that way, and we're going to have some executives helping facilitate some staff members, and I think that'll be really cool. So with that, thanks so much for coming. Thanks again to Janet and Nate. Thanks to Emily for all your organization, and thanks to Tiana for helping make all this stuff work again. And I am really glad I didn't try to do that poll on my own. That's not where, when it's time. What is it, Nate? When it's time to be, when people need you to be masterful, it's not a time to start. That's dabbling with the polls.
Don't do that unintentional diminishing behavior, Jeff.
Yeah,
totally. Right.
That's right.
I held myself back.
Great final word, Janet. Right on.
Thanks for listening to Leading with Curiosity. Please share, follow, and rate the show so that other leaders can make positive change in the world. Connect with Nate at nateleslie.ca. And remember, the brain behaves very differently when encouraged to think rather than told to listen.